Welcome to Shadow Fable. Don't forget to subscribe. I first arrived in Willow's End on a damp September afternoon, when the river still ran low and the sun slanted through golden leaves like a spotlight on forgotten things. As the village historian, I'd come to catalog anniversaries and old deeds, to sift through brittle newspapers and faded letters that whispered of the lives long buried beneath these Appalachian hills. But nothing in the archives prepared me for the dream that rose from the Blackwater River the night Thomas Walker drowned. The town had never forgotten Thomas, a beloved schoolteacher with a voice like warm honey, who drowned during a picnic by the river's bend 2 weeks before I arrived. They said evening storms had swollen the current, but I learned quickly that locals had a darker suspicion. The river dreamed, and sometimes its dreams seeped into the waking world. I dismissed the notion at first, a quaint superstition born of isolation. Yet, on my third night here, I heard distant music, children's laughter followed by a single, heart-wrenching gasp, echoing through my open window. The melody drifted from the riverbank, where darkness pooled like ink, and the hair at the nape of my neck stood on end. I rose and lit a lantern, its trembling flame revealing thick fog curling over the water's surface. Leaning forward, I saw a figure on the opposite bank, a man in faded tweed, soaked to the waist, his mouth moving without sound. As I raised my lantern higher, the figure vanished, leaving only the ripple of water and an overwhelming scent of tobacco and damp earth. I blinked, uncertain if the lantern's reflection had tricked me, or if something, or someone, had stepped out of the river's dream. I shivered with an inexplicable dread, convinced that whatever it was had watched me. By morning, the townspeople were abuzz. Maggie Trent, the postmistress, brought me tea and a trembling tale of her own. At dawn, she'd seen a child weeping on the old rope swing by the shore, even though the swing had lain unused for years. She swore the tears fell like pearls into the water, and then she heard a voice, so clear it was as though it rose from beneath the riverbed. "Save me." I thanked her politely, though my notebook remained empty. A historian records facts, not folk tales, until facts begin to crumble. Over the next week, the river's dream stretched further. At sunset, I walked its banks in search of corroboration or rational explanation. The forest pulsed with cicadas, and the reeds snaked around tree roots like grasping fingers. I found Thomas Walker's satchel wedged between two mossy stones, its leather cracked and mottled. Inside was his lesson plan for the day he died, an outline on American folk songs, a half-eaten sandwich, and a pressed wildflower that should have disintegrated decades ago. My pulse thrummed in my ears. How had it ended up here, untouched? And why did I swear I felt his presence, as if he were guiding my hand? Compelled, I spent the next afternoon interviewing anyone who had known Thomas. Stories poured out like floodwater. He tutored students by the riverbank, humming old ballads about drownings and lost love. He sketched the river in charcoal, convinced it hid windows to forgotten histories. He'd once confided to Maggie that some nights he awoke to find water pooling on his bedroom floor, only to watch it evaporate when he blinked. Each account added a seam to the town's patchwork paranoia, and I felt my skepticism fray stitch by stitch. That night I dreamt of water. I stood knee-deep in a moonlit current that tugged at my boots, pulling me downstream toward an unseen destination. The water whispered in voices both familiar and alien. Among them, I recognized my grandmother's lullaby, Thomas's booming lessons on poetry, and the hurried apologies I never spoke after our brief meeting at the archive. I could not tell where my memories ended and the river's began. Then I heard a low chuckle, hollow and knowing, and woke gasping, heart pounding like a war drum. When I sat at my desk with pen in hand, I found the pages blank. In the margin, something, had scrawled 3 words in a looping script: "Find the mirror." I stared at the ink because I did not own a mirror. My hands shook as I closed the notebook, convinced that Thomas's laughter hovered just beyond the lamplight. By the weekend, more villagers reported uncanny sightings. The grocer, John Barnes, claimed the fish he sold had bloodied eyes that insisted on following him out the door. The blacksmith, Agnes LaRue, insisted she heard her late husband's hammer, even though he'd died 20 years ago. Each account wove itself into a tapestry of dread, and I watched Willow's End unravel like an old quilt coming apart at the seams. Somewhere among these fragments lay the truth: why the river's dream had turned malignant, and what tethered Thomas Walker's spirit to its depths. I returned to the archive, rifling through journals from the settlement's founding. In a leather-bound volume dated 1832, I found a passage about the river's origin. Settlers spoke of a murmuring that rose at midnight, a half-heard chant promising bounty and doom. They spoke of a mirror stone, an obsidian fragment said to reflect souls back to their hidden selves. Legend held that whoever gazed into the river through that mirror would be granted understanding, but risked release of what they feared most. It was marginalia, scrawled by a preacher's daughter who vanished weeks later. The mirror stone had never been recovered. My skin crawled with anticipation. If the mirror stone still lay somewhere in these woods, perhaps someone had found it. And perhaps that someone was Thomas. I gathered lantern, notebook, and rope, then ventured into the woods at dusk, following the river's winding course beneath a sky smeared with violet clouds. The forest swallowed sound, leaving only the slap of my boots and the rhythmic rush of water. Near the bend where Thomas died, I spotted something black half buried in mud. My lantern's glow revealed a shard of polished obsidian, its surface rippling like liquid midnight. My breath caught. Could this be the mirror stone? I knelt, reaching for it, when the river roared behind me. An impossible sound for a river so placid only hours before. I spun, lantern held high, but saw only the foaming current pressing insistently against the bank. Then came the whispers, a susurrus of voices. "Look," they urged, "see yourself." Against every instinct, I brought the shard to my face. In its depths, I glimpsed my own reflection, eyes rimmed with fear. But then the image wavered. Behind me stood Thomas, pale and shaking, his clothes torn as if by the current. His lips moved soundlessly. My heart thundered. I looked down at the shard again. Now it showed the rope swing, bathed in moonlight, its chains squeaking as though someone still sat there, waiting. A single tear rolled down the polished surface, even though the stone was perfectly dry. I snapped the shard away from my face, and in that instant the shapeless dread convulsed the air. Lantern light flickered as if punched by an unseen fist. I stumbled backward, dropping the shard into the mud. The whispers crescendoed into a desperate plea. Free me. I fled without looking back, crashing through underbrush until my lungs burned and the night sky loomed overhead. The next morning, I woke in my small rental cabin, soaked in sweat, the shard's image seared behind my eyes. I found a note slipped under the door, written in the same looping hand. "You must dive deeper." No signature, no mirror stone. Just those words and a smear of dirt, as though someone had pressed mud onto the paper. I hesitated, trembling with dread, as I traced the words. To dive deeper meant to enter the river's domain, to confront its dream at its source. But I, a mere historian, had no right to meddle in forces beyond human ken. Yet, if I abandoned Willow's End now, more souls might be claimed by the river's reverie. I could not walk away. That night I prepared for the descent. I wrapped the shard in cloth and stowed it in my coat pocket. I carried a coil of rope, the largest lantern I owned, and a small journal in which to record every word and sound. Outside, the village lay silent, as though holding its breath. I reached the river at midnight, the sky smudged with stars. The current glowed faintly under the moon, as though phosphorescent. I secured one end of the rope to a sturdy oak, then waded into the water, its chill biting through my wool coat. Each step forward felt like a promise broken. The river's pulse throbbed against my shins, then my waist. With effort, I pried the shard from my pocket and held it aloft. The water's glow coalesced around its edges, illuminating the face of the river in the jagged glass. I peered through the shard and gasped. Instead of my reflection, I saw a vast cavern beneath the riverbed, lit by wavering lantern light. In the cavern, Thomas Walker stood at the edge of a stone dais, his eyes vacant. Around him, silhouettes of every villager who had ever drowned in the river gathered like mourners, their faces upturned in silent accusation. On the dais lay an open tome bound in dark leather, the same journal I had found in Thomas's satchel. He touched it reverently, then opened it to a blank page. The current tugged at me. The cavern's chanting rose, a low, pulsing hum that reverberated through bone. I felt compelled to step forward, to join the circle of shades. My mind filled with memories I had long buried. My father's laughter when he taught me to skip stones, my mother's soft humming as she braided my hair, the unspoken sorrow I carried for the student I'd failed. The river's dream was too intimate, too alive. It knew me better than I knew myself. I forced myself to look away, plunging the shard into the water. Its jagged edge caught on something solid beneath my feet. I yanked it free, and the chanting snapped off like a struck bell. The shades flickered and dissolved into the current. Thomas's face appeared above the surface, his eyes meeting mine in that brief, haunting instant. He whispered, "Thank you," and slipped beneath the water, sinking into a darkness that seemed bottomless. With a shuddering breath, I climbed the bank and collapsed, the shard clutched in my fist. The river sighed behind me, a soft exhalation that carried relief and sorrow in equal measure. I watched as ripples smoothed out, and the water regained its natural cadence as though nothing had happened. Dawn crept through the trees as I staggered back to the village. At the edge of town, I paused, expecting to see shadows disguising themselves in doorways or hear whispers chasing me on the wind. But the streets were still, birdsong unbroken. Thomas Walker's satchel lay abandoned by the schoolhouse steps, open to the lesson plan I'd seen before. The pressed wildflower had vanished, leaving only a single line written in dirt across the leather. The river dreams again. Now, each morning I sit at my desk with that shard before me, its obsidian surface dull and inscrutable. I record my days carefully, noting how the river flows, how the wind rustles through the pines. I wonder whether Thomas's final lesson will echo back, whether other names will appear on the banks, beckoning for salvation. And sometimes, when the night is deep and the world grows quiet, I dream the river's dream again, a promise of revelation, and the icy suggestion that I, too, might one day slip beneath its surface and become yet another shadow in its ever-waking vision.